Hello, my people. Welcome to Module 1 of Thinking Critically with Psychological Science, Scientific Foundations. For Screencastify, I don't know how to move my box yet, so I might pull the box in and out if it blocks lecture slides, and we will go from there. So thinking from the beginning, right? Our learning target today is just to discuss the value of reliance on operational definitions, what those are, and how we measure behavioral research. Psychology is the science that has a lot of theories, really strong theories, and there's a lot of debate where psychology falls in the domains of science. So first, we have to start with misremembering. This is one of the biggest cornerstones of psychology is when it talks about memory, where we fail to remember any events or correct details of the events, especially as time goes on, as people manipulate. And I just want you to start thinking about how our memory can also be manipulated. Elizabeth Loftus, she is... she actually, we're going to learn about her in the memory unit, and she did research on the misinformation effect and about debunking our reliance on our eyewitness testimonies. So as we take in psychology, it's important to think about how our own encoding can be changed, right? So our first vocab is hindsight bias. It is the I knew it all along phenomenon, right? So hindsight 2020, I knew all along that 2020 would be like this. No one did, right? And it's kind of funny when we think of Jeopardy, right? If you ever play Jeopardy, it's like right when the answer's heard, you're like, I knew that, right? I knew it all along after the question is answered. So in hindsight, I knew it all along phenomenon, right? And Jeopardy is my mnemonic. So mnemonics are ways for you to remember the vocab terms to make meaning from them. So then we have overconfidence, and there's a bunch of anagrams, and essentially what people, as humans, we are always overconfident. What is overconfidence? We tend to think we know more than we actually do. And you guys could be thinking of a person in your life that might be like, oh, Sally always thinks that she knows everything about this subject, right? But as humans, we tend to overcompensate for what we think we know and what we actually know, right? So, and for this example was, how long do you think it would take to unscramble these anagrams to make words, right? And people said about 10 seconds, but on average, it actually took 3 minutes for them to unscramble these words, just due to overconfidence, right? And, you can have people who are in sports that might be overconfident with their sports activities. For me in psych, I'd really try not to be overconfident. I know a lot, but I don't know everything, right? And so as we take the psychology course, it's important to understand that we may not know everything, but overconfidence is a human trait that we cannot help but to have sometimes. All right. And then the answers are water, entry, and barge. All right, and then thinking about pseudoscience, these are just popular beliefs that seem to be related to science. There's a lot of, if you go on the internet, you could really find some funky theories. The sky is pink, because of this, and it's really important to know where we're getting our research from and how it relates to our science concepts, right? Our next vocab term is confirmation bias. When you look for evidence to confirm your beliefs while ignoring everything else that may disprove it. So for example, with COVID, and this is again just an example, there's people that, there may be people that believe, maybe your belief is that masks do not work, right? Masks do not work. And all these things. So what people are going to do, if you're in this mindset of masks don't work, if you see stuff from the news and articles that counteract your belief or your theory, you're going to ignore it, right? And this is confirmation bias. So your confirmation in your belief or in your idea has a bias, right? And people tend to avoid ways that maybe could disprove them. And that is what confirmation bias is, okay? So how do we overcome the pitfalls, right? So these are things to think about as, these are our own biases going into this course, right? So you could go in thinking the brain does one thing, but remember, it's always, you wanna have all the information you can so you don't create a confirmation bias, okay? So now we're going on to scientific attitude. And this is very important. And I want you guys to pay attention to, I'm going to draw, curiosity, skepticism, and humility. So those are the three, three attitudes you need to be a logical researcher, right? This is the scientific attitude that you need to encompass before you start experimenting. And it's composed of, so curiosity, you need to have a passion for your exploration, right? Like for me, psych is so empowering to me. I find so much passion from it, and that's what drives me. But on the opposite end, we need to have skepticism, right? We need to be able to doubt and question ourselves. If we come in thinking that our theory is correct, as we get data and we start to see that maybe it might not be, we need to make sure we can be skeptical of ourselves still, right? And that is the hardest thing, because we are programmed to think that, we are right? And we'll get into that as we go through psych. And the last thing you need is humility. You need to accept when you probably are wrong, or you could be wrong. You need to be humble, right? So curiosity, skepticism, and humility are so important when we're thinking about creating experiments and moving on from there, right? All right, let me get rid of my pen. I don't know how to get rid of my pen. Okay, I think I did. Okay. All right. So, I don't know how to get rid of these now. Dun, 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 dun. I'm not sure. Oh, all right, there's an eraser. Thank you guys for listening to my first video. All right, I feel like I have a whiteboard. All right, scientific method, and we're going to go into these in more detail as we move on through the chapters, because every chapter there is a scientific method to it, right? How do we know something is true? Psychologists, like all scientists, right? We use the scientific method to follow that will allow us to construct theories, organize, summarize, and simplify. Okay, so again, looking at the organizing, summarizing, and simplifying. Okay, so the scientific method is very systematic, and it needs to be done in order to prove a theory or disprove it, right? And this is cutting off a little bit of the slide, so let me hide my camera real quick. There you go. And it's not simply, you can't say that this is common sense, right? Because we don't know, right? We need to be able to test it in a way that will be approved. So in the scientific method, I kind of laid it out in these 3 steps. And this is an old slide, so I have new slides and old slides kind of combined here. The scientific method has 5 steps, right? We first have to have a question or a theory that we're looking at, right? First, we have to have, why is mental health and anxiety skyrocketing during COVID, right? And then we have to build a hypothesis, and your hypothesis has to be testable, and we'll be talking about that a lot. You can't have, your hypothesis can't be Sally's favorite food is pizza, because it's not testable, because Sally literally said her favorite food is pizza, right? It has to be able to be tested. And then we do our test, we do our analysis, and then our conclusions, right? So this is 5 steps. And going a little bit into what is a theory, and this is very important. So this is another vocab word, and something to know about theory. Let me get my pen out real quick. It's an explanation. So it's an explanation that integrates principles, it organizes and predicts behaviors of events. So a theory has to be again, my theory, right, is that during COVID, mental health and anxiety are growing in numbers due to, right, blah, blah, blah. And then it has to be highly researched, right? So in this theory, we can't just start a theory that's the sky is pink and we're only going off blogs, right? It has to be highly researched. There has to be multiple studies, and we're going to learn about what is a proven study, what is a biased study. And for example, evolution is a theory. It's heavily studied, Darwin, adaptions, and we will have an evolutionary lens. And let me erase this. And I'm going to get out of the screen's way so you guys can see the next definition, which is a hypothesis, right? So again, it has to be testable. So again, I want you guys to highlight that a hypothesis has to be testable. Okay, you can't have a hypothesis that can't be tested, and then there's no point. And often it's induced by a theory, enables us to accept or reject or revise a theory. A statement of a relation between amongst variables, a if-then statement, right? So cause and effect, right? Anxiety and depression increase due to social isolation, due to social distancing, stated by the government. All right, let me erase this before it moves on. All right, camera back on. All right. And now we have to talk about how we research our observations. And sorry, I'm just looking at my notes to see where I'm at. Okay, so when we talk about research observations, and this is a lot in Unit 2, there has to be a certain order and rules within observations in order to make them acceptable, right? So we have to find a way to manipulate variables, but with independent and dependent variables, which we'll talk about. And within this observation, the systematic observation that has rules, we can start to collect data, right? And our next vocab before this module ends is operational definitions. So important. These are precise definitions of variables observed, measured, and managed. So observational definitions, so listen up, they enable you to replicate. So you write down all the steps of this experiment exactly in order for other scientists to replicate it. So operational definitions, you need to be exact on, like, I picked up this, I use this, right? So operational definitions, you need to be exact in how you're writing down your experiment so other doctors or researchers can replicate later on. So come up with observation definitions for there's happiness, a smile, intelligence, popularity, good music. Here, let me move my little camera. Okay. So again, like I said, you have to explain, so, how is happiness measured, right? So you would have to say, people's happiness is measured by their heightened dopamine levels within their brain that we can track, right? And so it's just, you have to be specific with these, and it allows scientists, again, to replicate and prove and disprove theories. So that is the end of Module 1. Now continue to your activity.